Well, for more perspective on this, I'm joined now by Yuval Weber. He's a research assistant professor at Texas A&M's Bush School of Government and Public Service here in Washington, D.C. Yuval, always good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
So we must start with this extraordinary session at the UN Security Council we've been witnessing over the past hour. Your thoughts on what we heard from the different ambassadors and how that draft resolution, which was doomed from the very start, failed as predicted?
So sure, in terms of the voting, I think the sort of the diplomatic loss for Russia is that China abstained instead of also voting to veto it along with Russia. And I think your previous correspondent, not the gentleman before, but the previous correspondent noted that that demonstrated the diplomatic isolation. Of course, in the General Assembly, there's perhaps going to be more supporters of Russia, but that's what the voting is for. In terms of the Ukrainian ambassador, I mean, clearly the mood was not good. And what he was saying in terms of describing the comments from President Zelensky of Ukraine earlier today is that President Zelensky said that there's going to be a tremendous amount of violence tonight. And as we're speaking, it's a little before 7 p.m. here in the East Coast of the United States. And so we're going to get into the middle of the night in Ukraine shortly. And in that sense, the fear of the Ukrainians is that their city, their capital, Kiev, is going to look like Aleppo, Syria, or Grozny, Chechnya, from the 1990s, in which if Russia can't get what it wants with a moderate use of force, then it's going to increase the violence, it's going to increase the attacks on military and civilian infrastructure, leading to just piling up of casualties. And it appears that is, in a sense, the second phase of the Russian strategy. If they can't get what they want in direct military-to-military confrontation, they'll see how many casualties the Ukrainians can sustain before they come to the negotiating table from a position of weakness.
Yuval, even when we spoke just this past Monday, you predicted that when Russia rolls in, it would be dramatic and with an incredible amount of violence. We're seeing all that now. Really, what chance does Ukraine have to defend itself against this massive military machine that is Russia?
So certainly, I think the Russians, in a sense, were over-optimistic. The President Putin has described Ukraine in just awful terms over the last number of weeks, months, years. And I think he believed himself that when he said, it's neo-Nazis, it's, NATO, all this sort of stuff, and anticipating that the Ukrainian army wouldn't fight so hard for such a specific regime. But I think he was transporting perhaps his own vision of Russia onto Ukraine, in which the regime and the people are somewhat alienated from each other. The people in Ukraine, and all the images suggest, is that these people, whatever their political differences, are fighting for their homeland, are fighting to defend their own territory against a foreign invading force. And when that happens, people will fight as hard as possible. And it's to that extent that, on one hand, the Russians probably understood that if they start to go after civilians, it'll be harder to come to any sort of sustainable long-term political agreement with the Ukrainians. And they tried to go after the military, and now that basically that didn't work, even the amount of violence that they use, it's going to go into qualitatively just more destructive elements, and quantitatively, they still have half to two-thirds of their military still outside of Ukraine. And so we'll see if the first echelon of forces didn't get for Russia what President Putin wanted, then the second or third are going to go all in. And that's when we're really going to see truly shocking images.
Yuval, we just have about 30 seconds left, but I need to ask you, once the fighting stops, how do you see Ukraine? What's its future? What will it look like?
Whatever Ukraine is left after this, and it could very well be that Russia goes in and really tries to destroy the entire country. If they try to do an occupation, partition, whatever's left of Ukraine, either from its own territory or from outside, is going to be motivated to fight back. So this could very well be, unless the Russians stop it, which obviously they're not going to because President Putin doesn't want that, is that this is actually going to turn into a terribly destructive and very long-lasting war that will go until the Ukrainians basically are wiped out. And at that point, it's not just Ukraine which is going to be in an awful situation, but also Russia, because at that point, it'll be a real pariah state.
Yuval Weber, as always, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.